in what I think is 1 minute, but it's really wonderful to see people. It's a weird thing that we gather by Zoom in this kind of way, and yet we also are entering into each other's spaces. So you're in my house, and I just want to give you a heads up that if you hear a dog barking while I'm speaking, please try to ignore my dog Baxter. He is choosing to remain with me, and I can't easily shoo him out. Since he wiped me out at the dog park yesterday, I'm on crutches and I'm not moving very quickly. And I think he's feeling a bit guilty, so sticking close to me as much as possible. So we're officially going to start now. It's 3 o'clock. And as I said, I'd like to welcome everyone to this series, our series on stewardship, growing God's kingdom in the material world, stewardship through new eyes. Just a little bit of a background before we do anything else, as there's a group of people who've been planning this from across denominations. You've already met Nick, who's being the tech person today as our host and managing a lot of the technical issues. We're using the chat function, and if you have a technical issue, just private message Nick, and he will be able to, well, at least resolve that. If you have questions for any of the people who are speaking, and that's primarily Susan Graham Walker today, but there are a few others who are going to come in at varying points as Susan directs us. But if you have a question or a comment, just put that in chat to everyone. Everybody can see what everybody's saying, which is another feature. And I will also be trying to kind of monitor that to bring questions forward as well. So, I'm Cheryl Toth. Very frequently, I forget to introduce myself. I'm Cheryl Toth. I'm an Archdeacon with the Diocese of Qu'Appelle, but I'm the Stewardship Officer here. And I'm moderating the discussion today. And we did this as in the spirit of the Lark Covenant, which is the Lutheran, Anglican, Ukrainian Catholic, and Roman Catholic churches working together. We have a covenant together. And so our planning team has comprised people from those denominations as much as possible, and doing that in that spirit. So it's a learning venture for all of us as we learn about stewardship and try and see things from the varying perspectives we bring in our faith communities, as well as all the participants. And we hope you learn along with us. Our guest speaker today, or our speaker today, is Susan Graham Walker. Susan is I'm going to say a little bit now and then just turn it over to her a little later. Susan Graham Walker is stewardship staff with the Anglican Church of Canada. She's also worked with the United Church of Canada and just recently retired from that portion of her work. And she brings a wealth of experience as a layperson within the Anglican Church. She's worked in a variety of capacities within the church, but has a passion and a love for stewardship, which you will see evident as she speaks. And then a few others will be speaking today as well when Susan calls upon us. One is Jerry Borkowsky, who's one of the assistants to the Bishop of the Saskatchewan Synod, ELCIC, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, and Father John Weckend, who's a parish priest at St. Cecilia's and a stewardship education person within the Archdiocese, and me, and I've already introduced myself. But before we get to all of that, what we're going to have is a word from some of the bishops who are part of this. Some of them, one of them I know is actually present, but you're going to see them in recorded form. And then we'll have an opening prayer after that, and we'll turn it over to Susan. There's opportunity, as we've chimed this out, there'll be opportunity for your questions and comments to be responded to as we go along. So Nick, I turn it over to you to bring the bishops on board.
It's a joy and a delight that we are able to work on this webinar on stewardship together. The Lund Principle calls us to do all things together except where deep differences require that we act separately. And we have so much to learn from each other in many areas of church life, but stewardship is a very important one. I have a typical Catholic instinct that I had to overcome, that speaking about money and asking people for gifts, not only financial, but other kinds of gifts, is a kind of an unclean topic. I've learned from other Christian churches that it is deeply rooted in the gospel to call forth people's gifts, people's resources, to put them at the service of the common good. We have very much to learn from our dialogue partners. It's very special to be engaging in this webinar with our covenant partners. It was a tremendous experience earlier this spring that we joined with Anglicans, Lutherans, Ukrainian Catholics to enter more deeply into a covenantal relationship. So this webinar grows out of that covenant and is an expression of it. It allows us to hear the wisdom and insights, blessings and gifts of other Christian traditions, and to share ours in such a way that we will be mutually enriched by them. I hope you are able to tune into this webinar. There's much to be gained from it.
I'm also really delighted to be part of this important discussion, and also delighted to be part of a discussion with our covenant partners who really are friends. So very good to be part of that. For Lutherans, the struggle with stewardship, it goes back a long time. Either we are really hard-nosed about it, and we talk about money and we want the money and we are judgmental about it, or more frequently we just pass the plate and hope for the best. In the time of pandemic, it's been an interesting learning experience for us, really, because we have based everything on passing the plate for 52 weeks a year, and then fund everything from the congregational level to the world out of that. Without being able to meet together, we've actually had to look at how we support our church and why we support our church. Alternate means of giving have happened, but the more important thing about that is we've actually talked to one another about what stewardship is about on a very basic level. I think we've understood finally, or have been reminded in the time of pandemic, that generosity is a central part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and that generosity is expressed in all kinds of ways that we offer ourselves. So to have a webinar that focuses on the broad sense of what stewardship's about, so healthy, and so pleased that this is happening. Thank you.
I just like to echo all that has just been said and say what a joy it is to be with you and to be able to be part of this ecumenical venture, talking about a subject that is very dear to my heart. Not many people know this, but my first entry into a church, following an experience of seeing Christians at Pope John Paul II's visit in England and policing that as a police officer, my very next step was to go to a stewardship funding supper. That was my first entry into church. A free meal is always a bonus, and that's how the Anglicans got me. But at that meeting, that evening, I saw people like those I'd seen in a Roman Catholic community who had a real passion, a real heart. They had something inside them that I didn't have, and that was contagious. And so in that meeting, various people shared a vision that they had for their community, for their town, how the church might be able to help. And it was so impressive that it kind of hooked me. And so I and my family went to church the following Sunday. So that was my entry. So through a stewardship, I know sometimes we're apprehensive about talking about money, and yet stewardship is about living the Christian life. It's about discipleship. It's about mission. It's not about institutional survival, but it's about who we are as people of God, and how our lives, in response to the love and the grace and the mercy of God, how we live out a generous life in our communities around the world. It's about stewardship of all that God has given us. It's about our stewardship of the earth, care of creation, and it's about living lives of generosity, lives of thanksgiving, lives of compassion. And so I'm really looking forward to these webinars. I hope you are too. There's much we can learn from each other, and I pray God will bless us as we go through these webinars together. Thank you.
So thank you to the bishops and to those bishops who are part of this covenant and here today as well as one of the participants. Nick, would you open with prayer?
Yes. So I've selected a stewardship prayer that I found on the website of the Archdiocese of Vancouver. And so I invite you to pray. O God, the Father of every gift, all that we are and have comes from your hand. In Jesus Christ, your Son, you have given us the greatest of all gifts. Fill our hearts with his love so that we may be communities of faithful, caring people. Grant us the grace to be good stewards who, in the name and the Spirit of Jesus, share our gifts of time, talent, and treasure for the building up of your kingdom in the church and throughout the world. May we live gratefully and give generously for your honor and glory. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Nick. So at this point, I'd like to invite Susan Graham Walker to address us, give us her reflections on stewardship. I want to say just one thing before Susan does that. It's kind of interesting to me. Susan and I met actually through job sharing position decades ago, in the Diocese of Toronto. We shared a position in children's ministry and a passion for working with children. And so it's interesting to me that at this stage in our lives, we get to do some things together again. And this time part of the shared passion is around stewardship. So I invite a longtime friend and collaborator to address us. Susan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl. It's your remark about the different fields in which we have worked together just illustrates how all of this is really about discipleship. And so I think you're going to be hearing that as a theme as we go through things. I am delighted to have been asked to be part of this. And as you know, this is a part of a four sessions, and we're going to move from an umbrella or a larger view of discipleship, of stewardship. And then as the sessions go on, we're going to drill down a little more in terms of what are the practical applications. So while Cheryl and I were worked in Toronto together, I'm actually a maritimer. I grew up in Nova Scotia. In fact, this morning I was doing a workshop similarly with a group of people from the Diocese of Nova Scotia PEI. And I was brought up in the Anglican tradition. We went to the cathedral in Halifax. Those are my earliest memories. I've been formed by that experience. It was certainly tested when I went to an Anglican boarding school for 5 years. And I certainly avoided church as a young adult until I was on the search for a meaningful community, and meaningful community as a way of living, and later defined that as discipleship. And so now I've wandered in various ways over that time, but it's it's in some ways has become clearer what it means for me personally to be a disciple. I have worked with the United Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada, so I am a little bilingual. I hope that I'll be able to I won't offend your dialect of language of words that we use to describe stewardship, but as one of the bishops said, this is really one of the bedrock pieces about that we share. And it is a delight that we get to work ecumenically at this point. Nick, I'm wondering if you will let me share my screen, and we'll move into a few more slides, so I don't have to look at myself.
You should be able to, yeah.
Okay, thank you. When we started this, we were going, sorry, Nick, it says that host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh.
Oh, maybe I need to do something.
Oh, sorry. That was my fault. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. There we go. This was meant to be an in-person event. I was really looking forward to getting to this time in Regina, and then there was March, and so we swiftly pivoted. This is a word. This is a COVID-19 word. I think we hear it in a whole lot of different contexts, but we had to pivot from not only doing it in person, but really thinking about what it means in a new world. And again, one of the bishops began to address that, and we'll certainly be coming to that over the next few weeks. In many ways, the message is the same, but it is through new eyes. One of the things I've experienced in the stewardship area in this period since March 13th for me is that people are suddenly interested in stewardship, and what we've been saying for 20 or 30 years is finally getting a little bit more attention. So we are looking at this with new eyes. Now I have to figure out about moving my so stewardship isn't quite so new, but our eyes are new. And one of the biblical stories that speaks to me quite deeply is the story of the road to Emmaus. We heard this not too long ago in our worship, and there was a phrase I heard that caught me for the first time, and it was the verse where they say, "But their eyes were kept from recognizing him." So what does that mean? But they were not able to recognize who he was, is the Message version. And when did they recognize, and when did their eyes, when did it happen? They recognized him in the acts of taking, blessing, breaking, and giving. And those actions are what happen in our Eucharistic tradition when we're together on a weekly basis, and it is a way of looking at how we share the generosity that God has given us. In the Message version, it talks about they were then open-eyed and wide-eyed, and so I'm hoping that we will join in some of that wide-eyed recognition as we go forward. One of the things that is clearly true is that Jesus is very interested in our attachments to the material world. The story of Jesus and the rich young man is graphic, and I've given you a contemporary image of what that might have looked like. It's important in my life, but originally, I wasn't sure it was good news for the rich young man or for me, but that changed. Here was a good Jewish boy coming to the teacher with a genuine question. I have lived the law. I have followed the commandments. What else do I have to do? And these are words from that are from the Message version. There's one thing left. You will all know these words. Go sell whatever you own and give it to the poor. All your wealth will then be heavenly wealth. And come and follow me. The man's face clouded over. This was the last thing he expected to hear. And he walked off with a heavy heart because he was holding on tight to a lot of things and not about to give it up. It's interesting, in the NRSV version, it's just a bit different. And I think that many of us may have heard this as if the young man was left without any way forward. But the NRSV says, when he heard this, he was shocked and went away grieving, for he had many possessions. It doesn't say, as the Message version, that he was not about to give things up. I think one of the most interesting things is we don't know what he did. And that perhaps I am like him in that I have a lot of things and I am holding on tight to some of them. But I have to say that over time, listening and responding to the come and follow me, I have released some of that tightness and let go of some things, and I am ever hopeful that that is the experience that we will take away from this, and that's what happened for the rich young man, that wasn't the end of the journey for him. I think it's interesting, the Message goes on to say, Jesus then turns to his disciples. The young man is heading off. Do you have any idea how difficult it is for people who have it all, and I count ourselves in that category, to enter God's kingdom? The disciples couldn't believe what they were hearing, but Jesus kept on. You can't imagine how difficult. It says it's easier for a camel to go through the needle's eye than for the rich to get into God's kingdom. That set the disciples back on their heels. Then who has any chance at all, they asked. Jesus was blunt. No chance at all, if you think you can pull it off by yourself. Every chance in the world, if you let God do it. So Jesus knows how hard this is. He didn't back off what was needed in order for the young man to be a disciple. But Jesus points the way that it can work, and that is through trust in God, and that we can't do that, or we may be more successful if we are not working alone, if we are in community. And that's why we are church together. That's part of our role, is to encourage one another and to talk about and deepen our own discipleship as we go forward and invite others to join with us and with Jesus in releasing some of that all of the things that the material world that we hold on to so tightly. So this is a definition of stewardship that I find helpful. It is everything that we think, say, and do after we say, I believe. And it's, one way of addressing these questions is to examine our life and learn to align it with the lessons that the disciples are learning. The church has called this stewardship, but because that's a loaded term, I think, for many of us, it's been abused and not well used. We've talked about saying earnestly that stewardship is time, talent, and treasure, but we've only really ever talked about money. So I think it may be more helpful to say discipleship is everything we think, say, and do after we say, I believe. So what does that mean for us as individuals and as faith communities? I'm going to stop sharing for a minute just so that we can be a little bit more in conversation. I think this is where we are always in these endeavors working at the larger level of our community life, but we're also thinking of our own personal life. So the ways in which we can learn and support one another and identify those actions of everything that you think, say, and do after you say, I believe, that can become the way of spiritual practices that that support and enliven your own faith life and your own interaction with the wider world. But it is also about how the community does that. And I think we've got some work to do in how it is that we engage people in these wider conversations. So what just, I'm going to go back. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back again after that little glimpse. So what does all this mean in these times? One of the things that I've been thinking about is that really the church and our lives have been accelerated. The future is now, and especially in the church, we are facing what might be what we might have thought would happen in 5 or 10 years, and now it has shrunken straight tightly with today. So that I think some of the things that we might have thought were our practices in March are not our practices today, or they need to be again pivoted. But just to think, and one of our colleagues is going to respond to this, is what are your personal spiritual practices related to time, talent, and care of creation? Now, I've put time, talent, treasure is usually the piece, and we'll come to that. But some lists include time, talent, tissue, meaning your body, and trees. So what are your personal spiritual practices related to those areas, and how might these change? And this is also where we can get into some conversation in the chat, and maybe you could share some of those things that we could share with one another. Cheryl, can you can you unmute the person who's going to give us a hand on this one?
It's Jerry, and I think he can unmute himself.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Thank you, Susan, for your presentation. When I was asked to respond to this, I couldn't help but think about a letter we got from our financial planner shortly after COVID kind of kicked in. And I know his letter or email was to support us in our investments, but he began by saying nothing has changed. He was talking about the investments. And as I read that, I thought, man, everything has changed. There is nothing that is the same. It has all changed. And we are in a very different place. And so I begin with that. And then I think about, as we said, that stewardship, that all we have is a gift from God. And we are asked to be stewards of everything that we have. And so I want to think of it in those 3 segments very briefly, just talk about, so time. I mean, we all get the same time. That hasn't changed no matter when. but how we use it has changed so drastically. We have spent time differently. What I hear time and time again is people having experienced something different with more time. I remember a story of a young father talking about his two sons. One is autistic and the other wasn't. And he said they would never get along, but in this time of having to spend together, all of a sudden the son who was not autistic would give the younger one a hug to let him know that he was not alone, and there was giving time. And when we think about being stewards, we use that in a different way that we never thought before, because I think looking through new eyes is so crucial. So that's just a very glimpse on that one. Talent. I think about talent, we've all been given talents. And how we use our talents, which is really, we talk about that natural aptitude or skill. I mean, I'm a clergy person. I'm a person that likes an intimate crowd of 400. I enjoy speaking with people. And what I've noticed in thinking about that particular thing is, as we go walking or as I'm around in our community, I've taken the time to, and I always do this, but even more intentionally, speak to people because people desire to have conversation. And so I can be that voice to smile at them and give them something else to think about. So often at this time, the person, you may see it and they are not sure if they even should talk. And so I stop and say hello and we have a brief conversation. It's using the talents that we have. And in this time of COVID, we need to be aware of what talents we have and maybe utilize them in a way we've never thought before in order to give other people hope, as they think about what it means to live in this time. The last thought is about care creation. I have been very aware of the world in which I live, and knowing that as a farm boy in the prairies, knowing how crucial water is to life and living, and also how biblical that is when we think about baptism. But I try not to waste water, and I'm even much more conscious of that now. If I have water in my jug that I'm carrying with me, rather than pouring it out and adding new water, I add the new water to it rather than throwing it out. And if I throw wastewater out, I don't throw it down the drain. I choose to put it on the plants. It gives us a different look of how we do things. Last comment. I went to Ethiopia in 2016. This was a global encounter through Canadian Lutheran World Relief. And one of the things we were doing is looking at places where irrigation had been done in order to provide the people, and also then to provide life and growth in ways that would never have been possible. And it was an amazing experience to me. And I remember after we debriefed, one of the things I responded was when the leaders asked, so what did you learn? I said, this experience has changed how I will preach, because life looks so differently. Now I see it through those eyes. And I think about our creation, how crucial it is that we are called to take care of it. And as people of God, that is our responsibility. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry, for giving us a glimpse of your personal practice. I'm wondering if there are others who would like to, I think you can use this little feature of raise your hand, and maybe we can hear a little bit about what some of your spiritual practices are related to time, talent, and the care of creation. One of the things that, and perhaps how they're changed, one of the things that is a personal practice for me is that I donate blood. And I've been wondering whether that will, how that will happen in the future. That's not a talent. That's just, I guess that's a bit of tissue, but it's something that is a conscious and intentional decision on my part to do as an act of faith. Now, I don't usually tell that to the nurses when they have my my arm on the armrest, but I do think about it at that point, that it is a way in which I can use my body and have an impact on others. Any other ideas?
Russell, We'll call upon Gary Russell.
Yes, hi, I'm here. Well, I'm taking the time and talent at this time with the COVID-19 thing as a time for a redirection of my abilities and skills that I've learned over the years. I'm an old timer. I was around in the early years of computers, and I've been a computer nerd before there were computer nerds. And now that everybody's having to go on time, I mean online, I'm finding that I can be helpful in showing people how to do that. And then the other side of me is I'm an academic and have the research skills, and I've been a journalist and I have the writing skills. And so all of my skills are being turned around to a different purpose for serving the church. And so just briefly, that's the way that I'm looking at it.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things I think, I don't know whether you've experienced this, but this is another way in which things are accelerated. People who were not, who are resisting learning how to use an iPad, learning how to make donations or do banking or other things online, are suddenly wanting to know how to do that, and as a way to get into our community life. We have a woman in our congregation who just had her 95th birthday and has finally learned. She had no desire or interest to use the iPad her children or grandchildren had given her, but this was the moment, and so she has been able to stay connected. I think technology is going to be one of those things. Anyone else who would like to offer some way? Okay. Well, just as we move on, just to give some time and attention in your own life over the next few weeks, how might you be able to offer the time and talent and your care for the creation to in a new way, and perhaps it is directed at the faith community. That's wonderful, but there is a big wider world that Jesus is interested in as well. And how might you use the things that you have been given in terms of time and talent to live more deeply into your own discipleship? The second question is really the narrowing in on the treasure piece. What are your spiritual practices related to your treasure, to money and possessions? Those things that the rich young man had such a challenge in relinquishing. How might these practices change in the COVID and post-COVID era? And I think there was somebody to respond.
That's me.
You just jumped around. Okay.
The passage might be about the rich young ruler, but for me, when I think about this question, it's really about the poor young girl, because that's the story in my life that links to that passage. And I think it's really important for us, particularly with this kind of question, which is, in a sense, the one that gets loaded onto stewardship the most and that people have the most ambivalence about, treasure, money, possessions, to think about how we've been shaped ourselves in our own lives. And so I grew up kind of in a paycheck to paycheck kind of family. Started in Manitoba on a farm, then I ended up in Northern Ontario in trailer parks on mining sites. And we were paycheck to paycheck. And I don't think there was anything more important in our family than knowing how to handle money. Knowing, when I was about 8 years old, I had this pink purse. Maybe I was 9, 10 in there. I had this pink purse, clutch purse my parents had given me. And I had like $8, $9, $10, something like that in there. And I was downtown with my mom And I put it on a ledge somewhere and didn't realize that I didn't have it until I was like, and had to go back, and it was gone. And my parents did not talk about things spiritual, but I knew that there was no greater sin than I could have committed. Even if I didn't name it as a sin, there was nothing worse I could have done in my family than to have lost that money and not been paying attention to where it was. So for me, the practice of discipleship as I came to faith, the practice of being a disciple was first of all about trying to change my perspective, let God change my perspective about not needing to hang on to money, and maybe not needing to hang on to all the possessions. Because we didn't have a lot. I mean, we lived in a trailer, but everything had a story pretty much. The place where we put our newspapers, my dad had built that because it was like the one back on the family farm. And we moved that. We moved our dust broom and dust thing. I forget what you call them, where you sweep the dust in. We moved that across the country. And so everything had a story. And so, and that kind of taught me things had a different dimension and you didn't let go of them. And so all of that in my adult life as a person of faith has been about trying to practice more and more what it means for me that this is not mine, that these are gifts from God, and that it's important for me to learn to be generous, to not let them shape me, and let God shape me. And so for me, that's about the way I give my offering. It's about the charitable organizations that I support that are out, I would say partners with the church, but are not religious organizations necessarily, not faith-based organizations necessarily. And then when COVID happened, when you're in the over 60 something group and all of a sudden you're being protected and people are trying to protect you from this, it really has got me thinking about what is this? What are these possessions? What is the treasure? Or the treasure, to go back to when Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I realize that the treasure really is more my relationships, what I do, my relationships with my kids who I can't see right now. They're all in other provinces. I can't travel to them. Can't see a newborn grandchild. Those are the things that matter. That's really what I think I treasure. And the rest of it, I'm starting to think, oh my gosh, if I got COVID and died, what a mess. What a mess I'm leaving people. I know my kids don't want all my teacups. There's things that are treasures to me because I have stories with them. They're not to other. What am I going to do with this? What should I be doing now? What do I need to do in terms of my will, my legacy? It's a different perspective. And I'm really just starting to unravel that in my own mind. And the other thing that I've noticed offering to me, when I'm as a priest in the Anglican Church, I've always used as much as possible pre-authorized giving because, if I'm supposed to put a check in an offering plate on a Sunday, I almost always forget because I've got something else in my mind. So I'm a big user of that. But now I'm not attached to a parish. And so I've been thinking about it and making sure, and it's been part of the ritual of offering. And then we couldn't gather for worship. And I really started to just want people to make it really easy for me to do it. I didn't want to write checks. I didn't want to look up. I know where that church is, but I can't get there. I don't know what their mailing address is. Why do I have to look it up? And I know it might just sound like a bit of COVID grumpiness, but it is a factor. I've started thinking about you know, if I'm going to give, please make it as easy as possible for me to do so. And the other part is, what are you doing that I want to give to? People are dying. People are hungry. People are losing their jobs. If I'm going to give you money as a faith-based community, what are you doing? Then I know it's going to benefit the world in which I'm living.
Yeah.
I know you benefit me, and I'm grateful. But what else? Because that's where I think I want my money to go. So those are my COVID new eyes thoughts.
Thank you, Cheryl. If there's some comment that people want to make about any of these pieces, we will of course be coming into looking at some of those questions. One of the things as I said, I was doing a workshop with the Diocese of Nova Scotia this morning, and one of the things that the Cheryl of that organization was doing was asking people over the coming week to begin to find an opportunity in their lives with their close loved ones to talk about their experience of generosity and their experience of giving. And you know, it isn't always about money, but it will likely be in some element of that conversation about money, because it is so pivotal to all of our decision making. So that's a bit of homework to think about, having those conversations and finding out whether those are hard to have. They are often a challenge for me if you spoke to the members of my family. But it is something that can help free things up. The final question was, what are the practices of your faith community related to time, talent, treasure, and the whole gamut? And before we hear from somebody, another member of this group, I just want to take a look at 3 leading practices that I think still count, and that we may be wanting to consider how these again pivot into how we live now in our faith communities. If you think about any organization that has invited you to make a donation to their work, their ministry, they wouldn't call it that. They do 3 things. Now we knew how to do this at one point. We've kind of lost our way, but this is the time to begin to recover these things. The 3 practices are inspiring, inviting, and thanking. And we heard Cheryl say, you know, what is your congregation doing? What's the why of the community? It's not about where the money goes, but what does it do? What does generosity enable? And we've found in the years that I've been working on with this paradigm for thinking about discipleship, if we begin with gratitude, that it can often change the culture of a community, a family community, a faith community. And some in the COVID era, with the issue of the offertory, in some places it just disappeared. Others are bringing it back with a gratitude element to it. Either beginning the service with people expressing gratitude for what is happening in their lives, or a person who does a little, we can all now record ourselves saying why I give, why I'm supporting the ministry in this at this time. So finding ways of and perhaps not putting announcements that are not about stewardship, but are talked about a generosity update. Those sorts of things. There are many ways to encourage gratitude, and we will be talking about that in the weeks to come, because it is such a really powerful practice. But one of the things you also might want to consider are, what are the 3 ways your church uses its funds that you value? That's another way of asking, what does what does the money do, and what do you value about that? And I think if we ask that question of a lot of people in our congregation, we would see where people want to put their time, effort, talents in terms of God's mission. Invitation, we are reluctant. The bishops began with a little bit of that. We are often reluctant to invite people into this way of life, into this practice. And we haven't talked about what it means and what the experience of generosity is for people, to talk about what joy it has brought, and would you join me in engaging in this ministry, and inviting in whatever way will reach your people. And that is something that you are going to need to determine, because of the culture, the way people communicate. And this is even more true in our new COVID situation. How do we invite people in? And then finally, this is another end, of course, of gratitude, is to make sure that we are grateful. I have yet to meet a person who left the church because they were thanked too much. And if we anticipate and look for every opportunity to thank people, I think we will find that there is a lot more to sharing our discipleship life in the experience of thanking. So that we will come back to those kinds of things at other points in the coming weeks. But I wanted to ask of the group, and to have our third person who's a responder, what are the practices of your faith community related to the finance, money and possessions that you are, what are those practices related to in your faith community, and how are they changing? And any people have some ideas they'd like to share after our third responder, please join in.
Father John?
Thank you. I always admired some of the older pastors when they would talk about how they visited everybody in their parish. And these were the days before, both people were working in a family household and people were at home, and you could do that. And I think that's kind of a neglected art today for a lot of reasons. What happened in our parish was that because people were going to be at home during this COVID pandemic period, we thought, well, this is an opportune time to engage in getting to reach out to them. So what we did was we organized a group of people, about 25 people, including myself, who just phoned people on our parish list. And we had close to 800 names on that list. So it was quite a massive undertaking. So the week after Easter, we did this phoning bee, and all we asked was, how are you doing? Are you still living at the same address that we have listed for you? Are there any particular needs that you might have? Shopping or groceries or whatever. And it was amazing, the response that we had in those conversations. I personally contacted close to about 100 of those people. And it was great, because oftentimes the only time I get to talk to people is at meetings or formal occasions, or a few minutes after church on Sunday and so on. But to sit down and have a conversation with these people on the phone, and we're not having any other ulterior purpose, basically, outside of perhaps maybe updating our parish list, but finding out how people are doing and what some of their concerns are and so on. So this was one of the things that we did. Now, of course, we had a lot of phone numbers that were no longer in service, so people may have gone to cell phone service rather than and abandoned their landlines. So we connected with those people by dropping an envelope in their mailbox if we had their address, asking us to get in contact with us. And of course, we have a lot of seniors who don't have access to computers and so on. And so we would distribute our parish bulletin to as many as we could, in addition to the bulletin that we have online on our parish website. I think in a lot of ways, when we can spend the treasure of our time with people, and this, despite all of the negative aspects that we are experiencing now, COVID has given us time to do that. Time that we didn't have before, time that we were spending in more formal meetings, both in our parish and in other places, that we didn't have time to sit down and chat with people. So basically, this was one area, I think, that opened not only my eyes, but also my ears, I think, to the needs of the people in our parish. We also wanted to reach out to people via some of the technologies that we have, via Zoom, for example, or putting something on YouTube that Father Brad Fulman, the pastor here, and myself would send out to people on our website. We called it basically a view from the pew. And it was just that we'd literally sit in the pew where our people normally sit and sort of have a little kind of a reflection, meditation with them. And I think in that way, kind of kept in contact with the people on an ongoing basis throughout the days and the weeks that this whole era of the pandemic is presenting to us. We also began using ways of, in terms of the treasure aspect of maybe encouraging people to use something like Canada Helps to forward their contributions to the parish. And that's something that later on in this webinar series that we'll be talking more of. But it's a way in which people could come with keeping the social distancing aspects and everything, but to use Canada Helps as a way of supporting our parish. Talent-wise, we had a young fellow in the parish who did a lot of work doing our videos, recording them and sending them out to people. And so we were trying, and we're still trying to think of creative ways in order to do that and to reach people in our parish and even beyond our parish in terms of doing these brief reflections and keeping them updated as to what's happening in our parish. So we're discovering, I guess, new ways of stewarding our use of technology at this particular time. In past years, our maintenance man has grown a garden around the parameters of our parking lot, and we've kind of revitalized that vegetable garden, and hopefully that can also be helpful in providing food later on for people in need in our parish, or at the food bank, or at the Marian Center, or who's ever in need. So I guess probably another way in which we are using the gifts of creation this summer, hope to anyway, to help out people. We have people that go shopping for our seniors who are maybe more vulnerable to the COVID virus. And these are ways in which also we are kind of reaching out to people who are a little bit more homebound. So these are just a kind of a few of the ways, I guess, that we as a community have been trying to reach out to people to provide them with spiritual nourishment, with outreach help to the best we can, and to, I think, just sort of reconnect with a lot of people that perhaps in our community that we ordinarily would not be reaching out to, that we would maybe, they might be falling through the cracks or whatever. So these are just a couple of ways, I guess, that we have been, what we've been trying to do. And perhaps maybe the pandemic thing has opened up opportunities for us to do these kinds of things, whereas otherwise we would be taken up, our time would be taken up with other areas, meetings and other kinds of gatherings. So those are a couple of things that that we're doing here and that we'd like to maintain doing throughout this time. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks, John. One of the things that is an outcome of this is that the telephone is suddenly back as a means of communication, and people are picking it up and staying in touch using the telephone. And then I've noticed that there is an unintended consequence of those phone calls, is that that congregational databases are actually being updated, and that's the kind of mechanical piece of things, but that's a good item. One of the things I've been wondering is how whether smaller congregations are what is the difference experience there compared to perhaps more urban settings. I'm sure there are differences. We're hearing that in the Diocese of Toronto, the rural communities are finding that they are in fact growing closer. We have a couple of things in the chat that I want to refer to. There's the one that Cassandra, we will come back to this question. The question about running the church and doing mission, and it's how do you describe what you're doing, and where the money it's not where the money goes to pay rent or to pay heat. It's about what the money does. Because you pay the heat, you have a meal program. You are able to feed people. Those things are talking about what the money does is much more effective in getting people's head around what it is they are contributing to. And then Rick, who's probably gone now, is talking about the Canadian Food Grains Bank. I just think that is one of the most wonderful things. I will finish with this story. I have wondered, this is getting close to a real situation. I am not very useful. I cannot do something with my hands, or I'm not a baker. I'm not a sewer. And the best I could do would be to barter facilitating a meeting. Now, wouldn't that be useful? And I think about the Canadian Food Grains Bank is one of the ways in which people can really actually use exactly what they do, and to share that generosity worldwide. And they are a wonderful and amazing organization that we don't hear so much about in the East, but is a real model. So I'm grateful that was brought up.
Good, Susan. Just a moment.
Yep.
Just Rick Block is the Saskatchewan director for the Canadian Food Grains Bank, and he's stationed out of Saskatoon. And if anybody would like contact information, I can send it to them, or they can find it online.
Great. We have reached 6 o'clock. My time. We have more to offer over the coming weeks. Other people have things being prepared that will be practical, and also in the sense of full understanding of stewardship as discipleship. I'd like to thank you for giving me the chance to share a little bit of what is my passion, and a little bit of homework there. And perhaps when we come back together next week, we can have some discussion on the things that I was referring to earlier. So Nick, over to you, I think, to wind things up.
It's actually me. So I'm just going to say a few things. Just a reminder that we will be continuing in this webinar series. We're also interested in knowing what other topics you might want to talk about, because we see that we might be doing this again. You have received a registration. It holds through for all of the weeks. So you do need to hang on to that registration, but you don't need to wait for another one. And next week, Father John will be our speaker, and we'll be using the breakout room feature of Zoom to be able to talk together in smaller groups, and taking a spring theme, or maybe from his parish inspiration. It's going to be called Growing the Stewardship Garden. And lastly, I just wanted to let you know that at some point we're going to be sending out evaluations, so that we're just working on that form at our next meeting, so that we'll be able to gather your thoughts and prepare, make things better and prepare for the next time we do this. So that's it for me. Maybe I think we could just end with a brief prayer, and I'll pray. Thank you, gracious and loving God, giver of all things. May we reflect your generous love in all we do today. May you guide us, that we are shaped by who you are. In Christ's name, amen. See you next time.